thank you for joining the CCIC in their annual conference this year. Of course, like everything else, it's taking place under very challenging and different circumstances. And it's wonderful that so many of you have taken the time to participate virtually this year. I think for me, what COVID-19 and the global pandemic is demonstrating is how unbelievably important the work that we are all doing is. And I want to thank you and to highlight the resilience that you've all shown in the face of this pandemic. I want to acknowledge the work of your organizations and the work of your frontline staff and your staff on the ground around the world. I know that things are really challenging, and I've heard directly from many of you over the past couple of months, whether it's in bilateral conversations or in the town halls that Nicolas has so generously hosted over the past couple of months. And I think, one of the things that COVID is really showing us is that on the one hand, we have to think differently about how we deliver international assistance and how we do this transfer of knowledge and activity to local actors, because we can't hop on a plane right now and go and deliver assistance. We can't, be on the ground to review projects or to provide information. It's just not possible because of the travel restrictions that are in place. And so I know a lot of you are thinking about how you continue to do the really important work you do, but under these unprecedented circumstances. But on the other hand, what COVID-19 is showing us is how relevant and timely and absolutely fundamental our feminist international assistance policy is. Because if there's anything that we're seeing, it's that while the virus itself doesn't know borders, and it doesn't care if you're wealthy or you're poor to get infected, we also see that the poorest and most vulnerable and the most marginalized people on this planet are the ones that are most impacted by COVID-19 and by the lockdowns that have occurred to try to protect the health and safety of citizens right around this world. We've also seen the fact that this pandemic is gendered, whether it's on livelihoods, whether it's the fact that the majority of frontline healthcare workers are women, whether it's the fact that children around the world have lost school as a safe place, and the fact that there could be up to 10 million adolescent girls that don't return to school because we're seeing an increase in child marriage and teen pregnancy, and just the fact that instead of going to school, they have to go out and work to support their families, whether it's with regards to food security and malnutrition, that women and the girl child are often the last to receive food. This is a gendered pandemic. And the FIAP is so important in guiding our response. And one of the things that I can assure you is that I and Global Affairs Canada are taking an intersectional, human rights-based approach to how we respond to this crisis. And in that regard, I'm pleased that we've been able to announce $159.5 million with regards to humanitarian assistance and support for vaccine research. That includes $84.5 million that went to the UN OCHA appeal for humanitarian assistance, which includes support to the World Food Program and the WHO, among other agencies. It also includes support to the International Red Cross and Red Crescent societies. And then we also announced $40 million to the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, because we know, based on our experience, that we absolutely need to make sure that we're coordinating vaccine development and research. And most importantly, that once a vaccine becomes available, that it needs to be affordable, accessible, and available to all. And so that's why supporting CEPI and the work that they're doing is so important. And it's why the Prime Minister has participated and helped co-lead on the ACT accelerator with regards to the coronavirus research and treatment development. And Canada will continue to lead when it comes to vaccine research and development, but also he has committed that Canada will be there to ensure that a vaccine becomes available to everyone at an affordable price. And I was so pleased and proud that we could make our contribution to Gavi last month $600 million over 5 years is so important because, as many of you know, uh, we can't just focus on this emergency. And I've said it many times in the past, and I'll continue to say it. We have to address the pandemic. We have to address the health emergency that COVID-19 is presenting us. But we cannot forget the really important, critical, life-saving interventions that we have done for a number of years that have helped us see incredible reductions in maternal and newborn and child health and child mortality, that have seen, hundreds of millions of children being vaccinated against preventable childhood diseases. And so funding organizations like Gavi, making sure that we can vaccinate against childhood diseases, is so important, so that we don't see a catastrophe of even greater magnitude than the one that we're currently facing on the horizon. And I was also pleased that we could announce $190 million to the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. We are so close to eradicating polio. Canada has been there since the beginning and will be there through to the end. And, it is my hope and objective that we continue to do these really important life-saving activities, and that because we continue with these activities, we don't see diseases like polio or measles or diphtheria make a comeback because we're pulling back on health resources. And I hope that that's a lesson that the whole world has learned from previous epidemics and previous outbreaks. But it's something that I, as the Minister of International Development, as a voice for Canada on the world stage, reiterate with my colleagues around the world and at international organizations. And I want to thank all of you for the work and the advocacy that you have done to make sure that Canada stays on this path, and to make sure that we can continue to be there for the poorest and the most vulnerable. I also want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about our priorities, for the coming year and the coming years. And in a sense, it might feel really difficult to plan right now because there's so much uncertainty. But as I said from the outset, the FIAP provides us the guide. It provides the context and the criteria that we need to follow. And I've said this to many of you, either in large fora or in individual meetings, that we have to continue to stay the course when it comes to the Feminist International Assistance Policy. We have to continue to take a gendered lens to the work that we're doing. We have to make sure that we are responding with a human rights-based approach. And that is something that I am firmly committed to. And so whether it is building on the Thrive agenda and making sure that we're delivering sexual health and reproductive rights across the world, we are committed to doing that. And one of the things, and I'm sharing this, but I know it's not new to any of you, and it's not news to any of you, is that we've seen a horrific spike in gender-based violence, and protection services are much more complicated in a lockdown situation. For individuals who live in violent households already, this is an even more difficult situation. I think, of the child who had school as a safe space. I think of a woman who can no longer, find a safe shelter to go to. And I think of, LGBTQ2 individuals who, are perhaps stuck at home right now in a situation that is not supportive. And so Canada remains very committed to continuing with the work that we are doing to provide protection services, to provide psychosocial support, and to make sure that we are supporting our partners on the ground. And I've heard so many of you talk about the importance of local organizations, and so this is something that we are committed to within the FIAP, and working towards, and it's become even that much more important because, as I've heard from a number of you, when it comes to women's rights organizations or LGBTQ2 organizations on the ground, because of because of COVID, because of the changing ability to move, that on the one hand, these organizations have pivoted and are providing frontline services, but on the other hand, they're finding themselves very stretched for resources, and so that's why Canada remains committed to the Equality Fund, which is doing really good work, remains committed to women's voice and leadership, which is supporting those frontline feminists on the ground, and recently announced our support for the Dignity Network and supporting LGBTQ2 organizations on the ground. Many of you saw a couple of months ago that Minister Champagne and I put out a joint statement calling on countries and world leaders to make sure that human rights is at the center of their response to the global pandemic, because we know that you have to respect human rights in order to effectively combat COVID and to contain the spread of the virus. Because if people don't feel safe, and if they don't feel that they can come forward and be protected and get treatment, that they're not going to, and that's going to drive the spread underground. And so we have, been very clear in our call for respecting human rights and not using the pandemic as an excuse to clamp down on human rights, and we will continue to be very strong in that regard. The other thing when it comes to the pandemic is that the issues that were there before don't just go away. And so I know a number of you have been concerned about Canada, about our commitments with regards to climate change, and worried that we may not continue with those as we pivot some of our activities to respond to COVID-19. And I want to reassure you that we remain steadfast in our commitment to climate financing and our commitment to addressing the gendered impacts of climate change. And over the past couple of months, I've had some really excellent roundtables with a number of you talking about, how we address food security and malnutrition, and how we link those to sustainable agriculture and climate change and women's rights. And all of that feedback is going into the department right now, and we're thinking about what that looks like in terms of our programming moving forward. And just to be very clear, we're also going to be having some consultations, which a number of you have already participated in and will continue to participate in, with regards to our climate financing. And although COP21 has been postponed for a year because of the pandemic, it doesn't mean that we aren't still thinking about it and we aren't still programming in this area. And so I think, for me, what the pandemic has demonstrated is how quickly our lives can be changed because of natural occurrences and environmental impacts. And what COVID has demonstrated is that it is how dramatic our lives can be impacted, whereas climate change is dramatic but over a period of time. And I hope that for Canadians and people right around the world, this pandemic has illustrated why we absolutely must address climate change and why we have to work on mitigation and adaptation. And so I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for all of the input that you've provided with that in that regard, and to just really reinforce our commitment. And a number of you probably saw the op-ed that I put out, it's a couple of months ago now, but really understanding the linkages, right, between all of these different issues, between health in the global north and the global south, how health is connected to food security, which is connected to sustainable agriculture and sustainable food practices, making sure that our supply chains are connected, and how we're understanding the connection with climate change, and of course the intersection with women's rights and human rights more broadly, and of course our access to democracy as well. And so this pandemic is just, as I said, really underlying and underscoring how important the Feminist International Assistance Policy. And, one of the things that is very clear is how important Canada's voice is right now. I don't need to get into the geopolitical context that we're that we're living in. But while some, some actors who have been large contributors have decided to pull back, Canada is stepping in, and Canada is, providing leadership, and we are leading with our values, and we are engaging, with our counterparts right across the world. But most importantly, we're listening. And we're listening to what their needs are, and we're trying to respond to make sure that they have what they need. I'll just share with you that, as you all know, I mean, hopefully here in Canada, we're moving into a better phase of the pandemic, but it's certainly not over. But in many parts of the developing world, it's just beginning. And speaking with counterparts, particularly in Africa, where health systems are incredibly fragile as is, there is so much recognition of the work that Canada has done over the past decades, particularly in global health, but also in education, in governance, in fighting climate change and sustainable agriculture. And that appreciation for what Canada has to offer and the way that we do development differently has been very, very recognized. And they're hard stories to hear what's going on. But I know that the work that we're doing is making a difference, and continuing to be there and to support them is really important. It's been very enlightening, and it's been very encouraging to engage with counterparts right around the world, to hear what their issues are, to hear what their challenges are, but also to know that that Canada can and is making a positive difference. And a lot of that is because of the work that each and every one of you is doing. And so I've said it before, but I'll say it again now. Canada's international assistance is a part of our foreign policy, and we have to be proud of that, and we have to recognize that. And of course, it's about doing the right thing in the world, but it's also about doing the right thing for Canada, because living in a healthier, more secure, more prosperous world is a healthier, more secure, prosperous world for Canadians too. And you all know that. But this leads me into, an issue or a point that I've been making since my appointment on public engagement and engaging the public. And right now, if ever there was a time for Canadians to understand, acknowledge, internalize how interconnected the world is, it is right now. Because the health and safety of someone anywhere else in the world will have a direct impact on the health and safety of Canadians. And our global response to this pandemic is a part of our domestic response. And we need to use this moment to talk to Canadians about why the work that we're doing matters, why it matters to people's lives right around the world, why it matters to the lives of Canadians. And I think that in these challenging times, and with some of the stuff that we're seeing everywhere, that it's time for us to really reflect on why we do this work and why we care so passionately about it, and how we can translate that passion to Canadians in a way that is meaningful to them, and that why they can take pride in the work that we're doing. And I think that now is the time for us to be bold and to be ambitious in our communications. It is the time to share the incredible stories of the work that each and every one of you and your organizations is doing around the world. I think of this story often, but in a recent roundtable, Grand Challenges Canada talked to me about a Kenyan startup that they provided seed funding to that provides medical oxygen. And the way that I kind of thought about it was this was like slow development, right? This was an investment that they made because it was the right thing to do, but they didn't necessarily know where it was going to do. Well, now that startup is the medical oxygen provider of choice of the Kenyan government and is directly providing life-saving interventions to Kenyans in this COVID-19 pandemic. That is an incredible story. And that's just one of the hundreds of the thousands of stories that each and every one of you have within the work that you've been doing. And those are the stories that we have to share with Canadians, and to really make it something that they understand and they grasp. And also to tie the connection. And I've been thinking about this a lot as a mother, and thinking, I mean, I'm sure a lot of you are parents and you have children at home right now, and you're worried about, the impact of them not being in school on their education and on their prospects. And, my son is only 2 years old. And so maybe it's a little irrational of me to worry about, the fact that he's missing out on educational opportunities at daycare. But at the same time, you know, as I said earlier, 9 out of 10 children around the world aren't in school right now. That's relatable for people. People understand, what that means for their child's future, and they can understand what that means for the future of a child halfway around the world. They understand what the pressures are right now of the stress of having children at home, perhaps working from the same kitchen table as their daughter who's doing grade 5 math, right? And how can we use our own lived experience right now to make the work that we're doing and the experiences of the people that we are trying to support um, around the world relevant to Canadians. And so, we need to use this opportunity to engage with Canadians and to do it differently than we've been doing. Um, because while, there's been a lot of success, we still know that there are too many Canadians who don't necessarily appreciate the work that we're doing and why it matters to them. And I know that I've been beating this drum for 6 months or 7 months now, but I think it continues to be really important. And I think we have an opportunity right now. And I have certainly been taking every opportunity that I can to talk about this, but I need your help. I need your voices, and I need your passion, and I need your commitment and your dedication to international development to be shared as well. And so let's think creatively, let's think differently, and let's push ourselves to be a little uncomfortable about how we do it. And I've heard you that we need to work together, and I've heard you that you're working on it, and I'm excited by that. I'm really excited about how we can take the work that we're doing and share it with Canadians, and how we can build support for the work that we're doing. And I think part of that is that just as it is part of our national identity, how proud we are of the role of Canada in World War II or in World War I or in the creation of peacekeeping, that what we're doing now, our response in COVID-19, our future response to the humanitarian crisis, and how we're going to rebuild is something that we can harness for Canadians so that this becomes a generational point of pride and inspiration in terms of what Canada can do on the world stage. And so that excites me, that inspires me, and that gives me hope. And I know that there is a lot right now that is hard, and there is a lot of uncertainty. But what we are working on and what we are committed to is ultimately going to provide hope for Canadians and for people right around the world. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing the results of this conference, to further engagement with all of you, because I know you have so many ideas and you have so many um, great, innovative thoughts that are going to guide us in our response and are going to continue to encourage us to be creative and to be bold and to think differently about how we respond and how we respond better. And it is going to take all of us working together, having difficult, challenging conversations and thinking through how we use this opportunity to further promote the work that we're doing with Canadians, to use it to rally and galvanize their support, to give them pride in the work that we're doing, and to demonstrate on the world stage what Canada is able to do and able to accomplish. And I'm worried about what is on the horizon in terms of the impact in the developing world. But I also know that we are making important contributions and that we can continue to do the important work, to make the right decisions, and ultimately to save lives. And I know that all of us together have that objective, and that working together, we will be able to have a positive influence in how the world responds. And so, on that note, um, I just want to again say thank you, and to encourage you to keep reaching out to me and to my office and to my team and to Global Affairs, to keep pushing us to do better, and to keep inspiring us with the incredible stories and work that you're doing every single day on the ground. And so we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot to think about, but we also know that we have a excellent policy framework that grounds us and that we can turn to and be guided by. And that policy framework was directly the result of the input of and the actions and the advocacy of so many of you. And so I think that we can be proud of that, and we need to keep pushing to implement our feminist international assistance policy, to serve and provide assistance to the world's poorest and most vulnerable and to marginalized groups, and to continue to be grounded in our feminist principles and an intersectional human rights-based approach to development. And so let's keep doing this important work, and hopefully by this time next year, we'll be able to meet again in person. And I just look forward to all the work that we're going to continue to do together. So thank you very much. Merci.